Hey guys, and welcome to a pretty special video. We're going to be talking about something that I'm really passionate about. We're going to be talking about using Photoshop and Lightroom for your 3D renders as a 3D artist. And you're probably going to wonder, well, what's so special about it? Well, trust me on this one when I say you want to see this video, right? Have fun. This video has been sponsored by Bloop Animation. If you want to learn 2D or 3D animation, the principles of any animation, storyboarding foundations, or even how to create an entire animated movie, then just follow the link in the description and you will get a begin-to-end course while supporting my channel at no extra expense to you. Okay everybody, so we're in Photoshop and we're going to be talking about Photoshop and Lightroom for 3D artists. Now, you're probably thinking, well, what's new about Photoshop? It's been around for years, and I've been working with it for years, so there's nothing new there, so I'm out, right? Well, do me a favor and stick around. This video is probably going to be one of the most important videos I've ever made, and I made quite a few, trust me, right? We're going to be talking about non-destructive workflows. We're going to be talking about composition. We're going to be talking about elements that will help you to enhance your storytelling capabilities, okay? So let's just go through the pipeline a little bit here. Let's say you're working in 3ds Max or Maya or Blender or whatever, right? And you have your whole scene done and you do a render and the client doesn't like it. You have to go back in, you have to change the whole thing, right? Now, in front of me is a scene created by Stephanie Ecoust. I hope I pronounced her name right. She's a French artist and she allowed me to use this scene for this tutorial. So thank you, Stephanie. Merci. Right, so we got this scene here, and as you can see in the bottom right corner, what she did is she did individual render passes for multiple layers. So she did an ambient occlusion pass, an emission pass, a subsurface scattering, specularity, diffuse, and so forth, right? Now, that's not absolutely new for most people, but we'll get there, right? Okay, and for those of you who think it is new or haven't never heard of it, by going into your 3D application and doing individual passes for each run, you have the ability to control them individually without having to change everything, right? And that's where the non-destructive workflow comes in. So let's say a client says, well, I like the scene, but I want the shadows in the corners to be a bit darker. Instead of having to re-render everything, you just basically turn everything off here, right? And you would go in and find your ambient occlusion pass, turn that on, and this looks fine, right? And you could go up to image adjustments, levels, and for example, push that in and tweak it that way, right? So quite a lot of control there. And that's just one example. So let's say client isn't happy with the specularity. There are areas that are too specular and others that are not specular enough. You can either go in here and tweak the individual areas by making a selection and playing with the levels, or you can go back into your 3D application and just do a new run on your specular map here, right, or on your specular render. So that will give you a lot of control when it comes to non-destructive workflow, okay? And I know that a lot of people don't do it this way, and I always wondered why not, because why would you want to go back and do everything, from scratch if you don't have to? But anyway, so we got that done, right? Now, of course, once you have decided on your final look or on your almost final look, let's say that this is it, right? You still want to have control. So let's say this is your output. Now, when it comes to telling a story, you have a lot of things that come into play, right? So you have the staging, the composition, where the light is coming from, the color of the light, and all that good stuff. Now, you can do a lot of that in Photoshop, but Lightroom is more developed for that. It's not called Lightroom for nothing. It's a photography tool, I would say, but why not use that on your render output, right? Basically, once you're at this stage, you're looking at a photograph, okay? So I'm going to show you guys a couple of examples how I played with this image in Lightroom to give it a different feel, right? And then we'll go into Lightroom and I'll show you how to do that. So here is an example of a very grainy setup. It's quite grainy, it's high contrast, it's low color, so low color saturation. This will give a kind of a gloomy atmosphere, if that's a thing, yeah, let's call it that. Next one, maybe a time period piece, let's say somewhere in the 80s. Again, high contrast, a lot more color. One more. This might be kind of a science fiction type deal, a lot of blue going on, and again, quite grainy, because that's a trend nowadays. Everything's supposed to be looking very grainy. At least I see it everywhere. I think it's a vintage look because of film that has been used and whatnot, right? And then we got this one, which is very warm, very kind, very Disney / Pixar, fuzzy, whatever, right? So you get the idea, right? So we've got all this. What we're going to do next is we're going to go into Lightroom. Okay. So here we have, let me just reset that. And there you go. Here we have our original scene, okay? Now, if you've never worked in Lightroom and you don't know how all of that works, I got Lightroom tutorials on my other channel. I'll put a link below and you can go and check that out, okay? But for now, this is what we're working with, and I want to show you guys how you can create a certain atmosphere, right? So I got this open in my Develop tab up here. And here on the right, we have a whole bunch of stuff, sliders, buttons, and all that kind of cool stuff, right? Now, what I'm going to do at some point is I'm going to go down here and it says Y and Y. Now, if I click on that, I will have a before and after. These two are identical right now. But as I start to change the one on the right, what you will see is that the one on the left will remain the same and you can compare, okay? All right, so let's say the objective here is to get that soft, warm, cozy Disney feel, right? Okay, what are we going to do? So I'm going to turn off the comparator window for now. Just go back here so we've got more space to work with. And I'm going to start with a couple of technical aspects. So as we go to the top right corner, we got this little mountain thing going on here, the histogram, right? Now you see that in the top corner we have a triangle right there where it says show shadow clipping, and we got one here. Now when I move over the one on the right, certain areas in my image turn red. Now what this is about is this is a histogram that shows me the red, green, and blue channels, right, that compile my image, and then the alpha image. And what it does, it tells me that bright areas are clipping, meaning that there's so much brightness in certain areas that it's losing all detail. So if I hover my mouse over it, you'll see that certain areas turn red. These are the areas affected by clipping. So if you look at the spot on the floor, if I were to zoom in here, you would not see any wood floor detail anymore because it's completely blown out. And that's something that we potentially need to deal with. Now I'm saying potentially because sometimes a bright area is just a bright area, and that's okay. Like for example, that white spot on the wall on the left, okay? So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go in and use a little Lightroom trick, which is to hold down the Shift key while double-clicking on these sliders. So I'm going to double-click on temperature. I'm not going to do that on tint. I'm going to do that on exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, texture, clarity, dehaze, vibrance, and saturation. Now there are a lot more down here, trust me. You can do hundreds of Lightroom tutorials, but we're going to keep it basic, right? So I got all that. Let's turn on the compare. Let's see if we see any difference. Well, we're starting to see some difference, right? This scene looks a bit colder than that one, but that's kind of what Lightroom comes up with. Let's turn that off. And now we're going to go back in and look at what needs to be done. So we need to get that warm Disney feel, okay? So we're going to look at the white balance. Now that's already set to custom instead of as shot because I already changed things, right? If we go, you see that's a bit more orange. If I go back to custom, that's after our double click. Now I'm going to take the temperature and I'm going to start to push that to the right to make the scene a lot warmer because that's what we want, right? So late afternoon sun. The tint, I'm not going to use that. Tint is something that is kind of a color grading thing. If I push this all the way to the left, it will become quite green like this, or quite purple if you go all the way that way. I don't want to do that, so let's just leave that alone. Then we're going to go to the exposure. Now the exposure right here, as we move this, you see that mountain in the middle moving right there, and you see those triangles popping up for the clipping again. So I'm not going to look at those triangles just yet. I'm going to look at the overall exposure that suits my needs for my dreamy atmosphere. So I'm going to push it slightly far to the right to get a lot of brightness in here, because, you know, it's Disney Pixar, so it needs to be dreamy, right? Okay, contrast. Well, do we want a lot contrast or not at all? Well, it's supposed to be dreamy, so very contrasty is very harsh and hard, so I'm going to push this a little bit to the left to make it a bit softer. Highlights, basically light areas. Pushing it to the right will blow it out again. Pushing it to the left will make it dark. So I'm going to keep it fairly far to the left, I would say somewhere around here. And as I do that, you see that that clipping triangle up there is now gone. We're going to look at shadows. Pushing it to the left will make shadows quite dark. That's the opposite of what we want. We want it to be nice and soft and dreamy, so we're going to push it to the right. Then whites and blacks are very important. So as I push this all the way to the right, you're going to see that it's blowing out again. So let's keep that very far to the left. We'll look at the black area, and you can see it's clipping here. And by moving that to the right, it disappears, but don't go too far because it's going to be flushed, right? So let's go, let's say, to about here. Now, sometimes you will see that clipping triangle, but it's not necessarily a problem because, like I said before, sometimes white areas are just white areas, right? Okay, texture. Now, harsh textures usually don't add to a dreamy feel. If you want that to be very harsh, you can push it to the right. All the way to the left will make it almost like you're looking through a white window. So let's kind of see how far we can go without making the textures hard, right? Right, next one, clarity. Same deal there. Pushing it to the right will make it very harsh. Pushing it to the left will make it extremely soft. So, and again, don't go overboard there. Let's do -5, I would say. Now, dehaze, I love that one. Usually when you make a landscape photo, let's say on the ocean or whatnot, what you'll see is that it's very hazy, let's say a city seen from above or whatnot, and you will dehaze that by pushing to the right. That's exactly what happens here. As you push this to the right, you see that the scene starts to look very different. Pushing it to the left will make it way softer. Now, we don't want this to be completely white. So let's go with, I'm at -1 right now, okay? Then we have a vibrance and saturation. Now, when it comes to vibrance and saturation, that's related to color, of course, and you don't want this to be desaturated like this because that's not, you know, doesn't fit in our storyline here. Pushing it all the way to the right, you don't want that either. You want it to stay soft but have enough color to make it cheerful. So I would say maybe something like that. And then you have a whole bunch of other controls here that you can play with. And you can work on color by color. You can work on sharpening. Now this is kind of a cool one. If you want things to look very sharp, you would push it all the way to the right, and you can see quite a difference, right? Right now, we basically want the opposite. So if you push this luminance right here, you'll see that it has an effect as well. The best area to see that is just in front of the bed here, underneath that desk or whatever it is, looking at those lines. As I push luminance, you'll see that it will make it much softer, right? So I'm going to push that pretty far to the right there. Now, the details, we'll push that down a little bit. And like I said, you can go on and on and on. But let's say that this is our end result, okay? Let's do a quick compare between the two, and it will show you what I mean. Okay, so a very, very, very different look and feel to it, right? Now, depending on what you need for your situation, your client, and so forth and so on, by using color grading and by editing your render like this, you have a lot more control over your render without actually having to go back and change your render passes, okay? So hopefully this will convince you somewhat that having control over renders like this in a photographic way can be a very important tool for you, right? Now, before I go, don't forget about the 3D modeling challenge that's going on right now. That's going to be a lot of fun, and we still have time, so don't forget about that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'd love to see you guys again. Bye.